Magnum opus, basically Latin for great work, often used to describe someone's greatest goal or achievement, what you remember them for if you like. But what if your magnum opus was a couple of decades ago? What can you do to further take advantage of it so people don't forget it? Well, if you make video games, remake that shit. I think nostalgia is probably the reason why everyone loves a good remake from time to time. It wasn't something that happened, say, 20-25 years ago, because there was nothing that could be remade. But with advances in technology, companies are bringing forward games of old with a new coat of paint, remade for the modern generation of gaming. It's a win-win situation, really. So rules, because fuck, I don't know. Games on this list can't have been remade before, even if it wasn't a good attempt at doing so. And they can't be less than 10 years old as of this year, because let's face it, you gotta give games time to become a classic. Anyway, better start writing this wish list. Hey guys, I just had a brilliant idea. How about we release an FPS game unto the world? I don't think the video game industry has seen enough of them yet. It's hard to make a convincing argument for any FPS series to be resuscitated out of obscurity. But if there was one, you'd find it hard to find one better than TIMESPLITTERS. TIMESPLITTERS plays to its name incredibly well. The scenarios thrown up in this game, including fighting monkeys with a ridiculous variety of guns, are only possible from a massive amount of time travel, all bathed in a charming cartoony art style. So it's safe to say that we're not talking about another brownie shooter where you put holes in Space Marines all day. Although frankly, the developers were part of the rare team that put together GoldenEye 007. You start to see connections here and there. I reckon we can get away with a couple of unique shooters. If we end up with 17 more FPS games that look identical, something like an HD trilogy of TIMESPLITTERS wouldn't be such a bad thing. After all, maybe casual gamers might actually learn what a proper game looks like.
Shots fired!
I remember a while back when people were having a go at games like Guitar Hero for having expensive add-ons that were sort of necessary to play the game. And you can kind of see why, it makes every new installment more expensive than it should be. But then we have Skylanders. I'm not even angry at Skylanders, I'm just really fucking sad. Sure, you could look at how innovative it was to introduce a Toys to Life feature, but what it actually did, what it managed to do overall, was kill off Spyro the Dragon. If you haven't played a Spyro game before, I'm so sorry for your lack of a soul, but let's press on. I'm fairly certain that Spyro was the first game I ever played. Back when I was a wee child, my parents used to put me in a creche or a daycare centre if you like. All the other kids liked spending their time trying to kill each other, but I spent my time parked in front of a PS1 incessantly playing one of the first Spyro games. Don't ask me which one, I can't remember. The early Spyro games are part of that special group of games that have the ability to transcend age groups. Sure, it's a bit primitive in some places and the voice acting got really corny really quickly, but they still hold up pretty well today. An HD collection or something similar for the first 3 games would be absolutely incredible, just to show the world that's become obsessed with Skylanders exactly what they're missing. And someone go get Insomniac Games involved again, pull them away from things like Sunset Overdrive and bring them back to their roots, what they cut their teeth on. The world needs you, Insomniac, we really do. Oh Metroid, where did we go so wrong? It's been 4 years since the release of Other M, a game that relied more heavily on development of characters and Samus Aran's internal struggles. 2 things that have never been a major selling point of any Metroid game. The things that attracted me to Metroid games were massive exploration and pumping aliens full of energy blasts. But then we have the title characters, the Metroids. And what better way to reignite one of Nintendo's oldest franchises than a visit back to a forgotten classic. Oh man, this game feels old. The tricky sequel to the groundbreaking original on the NES, Return of Samus is by far the forgotten title in the series. Seriously, I think people remember fucking Metroid Prime Pinball more than this thing, and that's a spin-off for fuck's sake. But no, Metroid 2 is a surprisingly good game and a fair attempt at trying to replicate the size of the first Metroid onto a handheld. Hey, the Game Boy had 8 kilobytes of RAM. Be nice. Metroid needs a kick at the backside, and if it can't be done with a new game, Metroid 2 is primed for a remake. I wouldn't really say that it should be upscaled onto the Wii U, because I reckon that should be left for a brand new Metroid game, but hey, Metroid 2 started on a handheld, why not remake it on the newest handheld we have? Maybe we can have the same thing Nintendo did with A Link to the Past, where it's remade, but with added extras that amount to a virtually completely different game. But if that's the case, just remember that in Metroid 2, you spend the game on the Metroid home planet, destroying Metroids left, right and centre like some sort of intergalactic Rambo. Yeah, now you want it remade. Remember when Donkey Kong Country got a massive reboot a couple of years ago with Donkey Kong Country Returns? It kinda came out of nowhere, but it reintroduced the joy and the pain of Donkey Kong Country to a whole new generation of gamers. So here's my thinking, how about we do that again, but with another Donkey Kong franchise? Somebody crank up that motherfucking monkey rap! Go on, say something bad about Donkey Kong 64. I'll fucking cut you. I mean, yeah, it's not exactly perfect, but this is something that a lot of games lack. Something that exists in almost every game Rare has made. Character. It moved Donkey Kong away from being Mario's punching bag and into a league of its own, with its own cast of colourful characters and a fair dose of rare lunacy, oozing charm and hilarity everywhere you go. It probably didn't have the same impact as Donkey Kong Country did, but hey, that's already been rebooted, so I can't complain too much. The only thing I can think that would need changing, other than grovelling at the feet of Rare to revive this game, would be some much needed multiplayer. Maybe not implemented into the main game itself, but they could at least include something like what Conker's Bad Fur Day did. Just something to take advantage of the diverse character lineup. The world hasn't had a proper open 3D platformer for a while now, and even if they don't want to take this any further, going back to it for a remake would be absolutely priceless. Alright, quick survey. Hands up, who's played Chrono Trigger? That's to be expected. Okay, new survey. Hands up, who's played Chrono Cross? How the hell does that work? This is a bit of a strange one. Chrono Trigger is one of those games that still stands as a pillar of classic gaming. One of the big 3 JRPGs on the SNES. It's been released and re-released all over the place, and if you haven't played it by now, not only are you severely missing out on one of the best games on the SNES, but you're also not trying hard enough. So come the sequel, Chrono Cross, and you'd think this will be of the same ilk. Somehow though, it managed to dissolve into relative obscurity, and it became one of those hidden gems you hear about from time to time. And it's not like it's a bad sequel or anything, critics practically drowned this game in tens when it came out, but it still managed to be swept under the rug soon afterwards. Oh, and how about this? Chrono Cross in all its glory, a great sequel to a sensational game, never came out in Europe. Re-released on PSN in North America, but nothing in Europe. So if you want a reason why this should be remade, so they can bring the damn thing to Europe. The year is 2002. It's actually 2014, but I'm doing a thing here, so shut up. And having stabilised themselves enough to launch a massively successful franchise, Square Enix released Final Fantasy XI, the first MMORPG Final Fantasy game raking in subscription fees and giving them a more reliable form of income. This, rather unfortunately, had a negative effect on what came next from Square Enix. I mean, Final Fantasy XII was pretty good, but everything surrounding Final Fantasy XIII and its sequels start to show Square Enix's lack of imagination and willingness to move forward. So, what do they need to do? Go backwards. Final Fantasy VII was seen as the biggest single step forward for the series when it came out. 3D models, full motion cutscenes, and some pretty fantastic music, all of which fans can point to as being enough ammunition for saying it's the best in the series. And for you kind of people, I've got 2 words for you. Prove it. No, I'm serious. To date, Final Fantasy VII is still the most commercially successful in the series, still the game that more often than not squeezes its way into greatest game of all time contention. So it makes more sense than you'd think for Square Enix to think about remaking this game. And sure, it's a fantastic game, but those are some seriously blocky character models by today's standards. And if you're willing to put so much effort into a game that not as many people care for in Final Fantasy XIII, polishing up the models, orchestrating that soundtrack, almost embracing what Square Enix managed with sequels and related films, that's walking, talking money right there. the world has really started to miss games like Zombies Ate My Neighbours. I mean, we're virtually knee-deep in zombie survival games as it is, but this little gem for the SNES and Sega Genesis predates them all. It wasn't all that successful when it came out, but looking back at it nowadays really gets you appreciating the majesty of older games. Never really tried for realism this game, never really tried to be too serious. The style itself is very B-movie zombie film, filled with goofy enemies and a hilarious array of weapons. It's less of a zombie game you play for underwear staining thrills, but for the sheer joy of mowing down zombies with a weed whacker. Oh, and if you find some levels a little bit difficult, maybe Chainsaw Hedge Maze Mayhem has given you some issues, you can always find a friend to play along with you to make it half as difficult and twice as hectic. It's times like this where I don't find myself asking questions like, why should someone remake Zombie Ate My Neighbours? More so, a little voice in the back of my head screaming at me, saying, why wouldn't you remake this game? I also see dead people. Seriously, could you imagine 2-player Wi-Fi rounds of a remastered, remade version of Zombies Ate My Neighbours on something like the 3DS? I mean, I guess you could put it on the PS4 or Xbone, but I'd hate to have the joys of this game taken away by forcing it into a 3D game. Hence why it should probably jump to the handheld market. Honestly, I don't really care too much because the prospect of a modern Zombies Ate My Neighbours is the kind of thing that will keep you awake at night. The sort of thing that would actually get you interrupting adverts by shouting at them to relinquish you of your hard-earned cash. I can't just make a video like this without saying shut up and take my money. I'm pretty sure I'm breaking some sort of unwritten law of the internet somewhere. Gabe Newell is watching. He's always watching. Of all the video game franchises out there, Pokemon seems to be the one most tuned to pumping out remakes. Hey, people like the original Red and Blue, might as well remake them and misspell blue so it reads leaf green. Hey, remember how people loved Ruby and Sapphire? Well, let's send the internet into a frenzy by giving them Omega Ruby and Alpha Sapphire. But you know what would really work? Like, really work? Hang on, let me just get my camera. Pokemon Snap as I live and breathe. I challenge anyone who's played through this who understands what this game is to find any big faults with it. I mean, I guess it's a little short, but that's not the hardest thing to fix in a remake. Frankly, it's the perfect game for the Wii U. Gamepad becomes the camera and you move it around to take pictures. You could have a share feature for pictures to be posted on Miiverse in a similar way to how the picture box was used in Wind Waker HD. And of course, let's be real here, it'd be nice if the number of Pokemon available to take a picture of was somewhere in the hundreds. Like, high hundreds. Like, if people start complaining that there's too many of them, I'll be pretty damn happy. I'm going to keep this short because it's a little obvious for a list like this. When you've already had Ocarina of Time, Wind Waker, and kinda not really A Link to the Past, all remade for modern consoles, one of the last big name Zelda games from that kind of era, Majora's Mask, is really overdue for a remake. Partly because it's cut from the same cloth as Ocarina of Time, but also because it's still talked about and picked to pieces nowadays. I'm sure we all saw the fan-made HD trailer and thought,
Oh man, that's good.
it was a vision of the future, an alternate universe where Nintendo gives fans the remake that we've been crying out for ever since they remade Ocarina of Time. I wouldn't go as far as saying Nintendo needs a game like Majora's Mask on its consoles, as there's some pretty massive games on the way, but certainly the fans need it. I'm starting to wonder how many small, fluffy, cute animals I had to sacrifice to get Majora's Mask HD. I'll just keep going and see where it gets me. When you think Metal Gear, you probably think something like... Yeah, that's about right. But you can't forget where Metal Gear came from. All of the cinematics, all of the emotion, all of the nanomachines, it all stemmed from a quirky little game released way back when franchises like Street Fighter and Mega Man were just getting started. Ooh, Metal Gear! Talk about humble beginnings, you'd almost never guess that the original Metal Gear would grow into games like this. I mean, all the basic aspects are there, Snake's still the perennial badass he's always been, and it's still a bad idea to be seen by any bad guy. But it's all in a top-down perspective, and with a lot less of those cutscenes. Think of it as a Metal Gear game with gameplay as its priority, which is a very strange thought in itself. But hang on, that was back in 1987 when Robocop was a new and exciting film and the world's population was around 5 billion. Think about what we could do with it now. Hideo Kojima, in all his glory, has previously hinted at the possibility of remaking the original Metal Gear, but with the Fox engine used in Metal Gear Solid 5. You'd effectively get what amounts to a brand new Metal Gear game, but with the plot taken from a game made 27 years ago. Metal Gear has always prided itself on its storytelling, and while the text in older games does a decent job of doing that, spectacular cutscenes are just so much better. Not to mention that the story in the first Metal Gear is actually quite important for the series, and if you're missing out on playing it, there's an awful lot of story you have to be told. You'd only be changing how you present the qualities of the original Metal Gear rather than anything too drastic. An 8-bit game transformed with full motion cutscenes is the kind of thing that dreams are made of. This has been rabbidluigi, and Konami, if you're thinking about remaking this game, which I think you are, make sure you keep in I Feel Asleep. It's just too good. Hey guys, hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, make sure you do all of those things that show how much you enjoyed it. I don't know, you could jump up and down or something, or you can, help an old lady cross the road. Whatever you want, I'm not really going to judge, just whatever. If you disagree with this video and it offends you greatly, feel free to follow me on Twitter or like me on Facebook so you can explain to me at length why I'm wrong and what I've done to offend you. Probably not putting a game which I've never played. I should do more of that. I should talk about things which I know nothing about. See what happens then. Whatever, bye.